All right, apologies for the slight delay here, as my computer, as you'd find if you ever try to do live streaming, it's always a technical adventure. I came back to my computer and had forgot that my microphone existed, so I had to restart. And that, of course, fixed everything. So, of course, before we begin here on YouTube, we must perform the ceremonial faces. All right, we good here?
Yeah, I was going to pitch that we would do Pistons lottery reaction phases, but yeah, we can do that another time.
I think maybe that's what we should do from now on. Is just we have to actually say what our faces are reacting to. like you just like each of us will just say something that's happened in the NBA, and you have to react with only a face. And then that can be the thumbnails. That's excellent. That would be
if we remember that 5 days from now, which we will not. It is a good idea.
No, we're gonna remember.
Okay.
No, I come on. I got at least 2 more years before I can't remember things. I'm gonna write it down. How about that? Write it down. Suggest something that happened in the NBA before making each face. Okay, let's start the podcast. Good Sunday evening. We have much to discuss with a couple of 2-2 series in which the team that was down 0-2 has tied it in both circumstances, and the Nuggets doing so on the road. Of course, we also must discuss the lottery. And we had quite a bit of chaos, as the new rules, quite frankly, are intended to create. And then we'll be taking your comments and questions as well. We're going to talk Wolves Nuggets first, so we'll try to take questions on those series in turn. We'll get some priority, and then at the end, Danny and I will each select a commenter to get a free year of Dunc'd On Prime. And of course, please like and subscribe as well for all of y'all. Denver, Minnesota. The champs are back, and they did it with a lot of the things that have made them great. Minnesota slightly unraveled. It was a 28-4 run after the initial jag of emotion had dissipated from the Wolves that put Denver in control basically the entire evening. The Wolves got back under single digits a couple of times, but never were even within 2 possessions in the end. So let's just start with our big takeaways here.
It's kind of, in some ways, a hard game to put into full evaluation with the rest of the series, because there are certain things you could say, oh, that's anomalous. Like, for example, Denver's shot making in this game at stretches of time was completely preposterous. Jamal Murray.
Didn't we say that after the last game too?
Yeah. And I mean, and Denver does that in a different way than most.
They're pretty good, right? When you said Steph Curry's shot making is anomalous until he did it for 15 years in a row.
Yeah, and it's the benefit of having the best player in the world, and Nikola Jokic has looked like the best player in the world. He definitely did tonight, 35, 7 and 7, and had some gorgeous passes and had just ridiculous touch inside the arc. So you have that part of it, and we'll definitely talk about that thread. And so, but there's an interesting other part of this, which I think is compelling when we think about the rest of the series, even if Denver is in an advantage position now with home court advantage reestablished, is Minnesota, that 28-4 combined run. And it's worth noting, I wanted to get into that in some depth, that all of that run came with either Jokic or Jamal Murray off the court. And that's something that should haunt the Wolves to an extent. That part all counts. It all counts the same as every other part. And then the ridiculous 8-0 end of the second quarter, which was super memorable in its own way. Minnesota, like you and I also described this at times as an offensive loss for them during parts of the competitive portion of this game. Like if they could clean up some of that other stuff, they're still absolutely competitive in this series. It's just that one of the challenges of facing the Denver Nuggets is that any pitfalls, any lulls can just be catastrophic.
Well, that's really, I think, the thing that sticks out to me the most is that Denver had this feeling of invincibility, even going up against the Lakers, where, and LeBron has talked about this, we talked about it so much in last year's playoffs, of just them punishing any mistake at all, any lull in a game, etc. And that's the kind of basketball that Denver played over these two games. And particularly, I felt that even more tonight as they're like trying to make their comeback. And every time they go on a little bit of run, right? Like they made 3 threes in a row to start the second half. You're like, oh man, here they come, right? But nope, Denver scored in those circumstances, right? And they just, or they would just hit an incredible back-breaking shot that, people shouldn't be able to hit, but like Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray are able to do that. Or even Aaron Gordon came through hitting his first 10 shots of the game, including like some that were relatively difficult. And so, yeah, I mean, this wasn't a perfect basketball game for Denver, but it was enough that, particularly in the offensive end, that they really caused problems for the Wolves. And so one way I wanted to frame this discussion, as we have these two games now in Minnesota that Denver won comfortably, in somewhat similar fashion, you would say, to the way Minnesota won in Denver. Was this result of Denver winning these two games, is that more about Denver playing better or Minnesota playing worse?
If Minnesota could have conceptually kept up the defensive quality that they had in the Denver games, I think they could have won these games. So I think it's a lot of both. But the level that Minnesota played at in those first two games, I think that would have been enough to win at least one of these two games at home. So it's more of both than I think some will think, because some will just like, oh, Denver played way better. But like Minnesota performed at a level offensively and defensively in those first two games that would have been hard to sustain.
Yeah, and certainly the fact that they got more stops, got more transition in those two games that matter. Those two things do, both sides, offense and defense, cannot be fully separated from one another. I think it is more about Denver, and because they just, like, the Wolves were doing specific things and Denver countered them. I'm not sure, actually, that the Wolves could come out with the exact same approach and the exact same style of play from games 1 and 2, and that would work against this Denver team. I think Denver has found counters. The Wolves have tried they tried some weird shit in this game, and some of it worked okay, some of it didn't. But to me, I think Denver has evolved, and that has been Nikola Jokic in particular, Jamal Murray. Those guys have found ways, typically throughout series, to get better as time has gone on. And the other thing you'd have to point to is just Murray's health as well. I mean,
yes.
and we're seeing it in the other series with Jalen Brunson now, and whatever he was able to summon, and maybe those 3 days off were what did it. Whether it was mentally, whether it was physically, that he's just been like, he's been able to get by guys that he couldn't get by before. I don't think that that's like Jaden McDaniels isn't playing as well anymore. It's that Jamal Murray is like getting separation from him and making shots that he couldn't. And then that's kind of been a theme too. We talked about it on the show, talked about it even in the Knicks series, and also in the OKC series, of certain defenders like giving guys problems at the beginning, and with, maybe there's something unusual or different about those guys, and that the great offensive players can find a comfort zone eventually against some of those guys as the series goes on. And so to me, like, the Nuggets really increased their physicality a ton, right? Like Jokic has just been like absolutely shoving people around. Some of them are fouls, they're not being called, but that's how you need to play basketball, is to the limit of the rules. He's absolutely laying the wood on every screen. When he posts up, he's just like forearming guys out of the way, getting to his spots. His posting up in the first half of this game was unbelievable, no matter
Oh,
who was guarding him, right? And I don't think that those shots, I mean, maybe he's like, doing a better job of getting to his spots and being more forceful. Maybe you could say the shots are slightly different, but like, he's still posting up one-on-one against the same guys. They're still running this pretty much the same plays that they were running before. They're just doing a better job. I don't think that it's like, and maybe you could say the Wolves just couldn't maintain that same level of intensity. I mean, they're at home. It seems like they're, pretty intense.
mm-hmm.
So to me, it has been a lot more about Denver that and it's been very heartening and inspiring, frankly, to see them push this to a new level, because we were wondering about whether they just didn't have it, that they just couldn't do it against this Wolves team, and they have. It's really been impressive.
One of the points you brought this up, we did this game for playback/YouTube, and you brought up the idea of the physicality of the Nuggets and how they're not going to call it differently. And it reminded me of a similar thread in a different time, which was the off-ball kind of grabbing that the Cavs would do against the Warriors in those NBA finals that those teams played against each other. And there was a lot of belly aching to the press by Kerr and the Warriors about all the grabbing that they were doing. And there is a fundamental understanding that the Cavs had in that of, there are certain things that will and will not get called, and certain things that will or will not get called in volume as well in these series. And at a certain point, unless you get the right ref crew at the right time, you just have to play within the game as it's being officiated. And we've complained about a lot of other versions of officiating at certain points in these playoffs, but it was a reminder of that. And so Jokic understands the level of screening and everything else that he can do and get away with, is making it sound more nefarious than it is. It's just, where is the line? I'm going to go to that line, and maybe periodically I exceed it, but not like every step of every way. And Minnesota has gotten really disjointed by that. We saw Nickeil Alexander get tossed from game 3 and everything else. And that is also really hard to counter physically for the Minnesota Timberwolves because of what Jokic is, and also kind of, if you want to say, mentally, emotionally.
Yeah, I think so. And we thought like Minnesota was the ones who were more physical, who had that advantage. Like this is the first time we've ever really seen this Nuggets team just get like punked physically almost. And Gordon and Jokic in particular, and Murray as well in his own way, have responded to that. So let's see.
The one Minnesota guy who has been dominant and like has the most physically dominant player to me in this series, and we'll see where this goes, but Anthony Edwards was phenomenal in this game. 44 points, 16 to 25 from the field, 5 of 8 from 3, +5 in a game his team eventually lost by 8. And Edwards played a light 45 minutes in this contest. If you want the full measure, he played 45-20. So that means he sat for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And they got crushed in those minutes. Those minutes are actually extremely important to the story of this game. And how Edwards did it was a mix of kind of, to me, 2 different big things. So one of those was his jumper was very effective in this game. And there were even some settles in there, but overall, Ant was making his 3-pointer. He was 5 of 7 from 3, only took 1 mid-ranger and made it 5 of 8. I think there was a heave in there at one point. At the end of a quarter. So that was one part, was the jump shot was going. But the thing that makes, to me, that's going to come and go. Like Edwards he's a better shooter than he was, but he's still not that ridiculous. Is his confidence, his aggressiveness, his success going towards the basket, not only beating guys one-on-one, but understanding that Denver doesn't really have the help defense to stop him either, whether it's some of the beautiful layup finishes or that nasty dunk he had in the fourth quarter.
5 of 7 from 3 on non-heaves and 9 of 11 at the rim. It's pretty good. That is a pretty devastating combination. And I think all of his threes, he might have had one spot up, but I think most of them were like they're switching, pull up at the mesh point of the screen. Maybe the big is like a little bit late out of the pick and roll because, of course, they're putting two on the ball on him at every possible opportunity in pick and roll, and he still was able to score this many points. And so, yeah, he was devastating after he really blamed himself in game 3 for not being aggressive enough. Certainly he was in this game. It was unfortunate, though, that his teammates really were not along for the ride. That included Karl-Anthony Towns. It was a reversion for Karl-Anthony Towns to some of the bad old days for him in the playoffs, missing his first 7 shots and just his passing. He had a couple of decent passes, but overall I thought he was missing guys a fair amount, a lot of these headlong drives. And I thought the Nuggets, I mean, that's another way in which the Nuggets have just improved their defense. Like they have started to get an understanding on Karl-Anthony Towns where they had Aaron Gordon guarding Ant for most of this game. And so that left Karl-Anthony Towns being guarded by Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And that is a remarkable state of how good Ant is, maybe more than anything, that the delta between Aaron Gordon, who on Anthony Edwards, compared to KCP on Karl-Anthony Towns, even though like Karl-Anthony Towns is basically a center and KCP is a shooting guard, that it's still they actually profited from that. Having Gordon and again, not that Ant got stopped or anything, but they, I thought their half court defense overall was pretty good, and then they were really good on Towns. And one of the things was when Towns tried to go to his bully ball drives, they were able to back off enough, like not let him run them over, and then go for the strip when he tried to go up. That he just was a little bit more out of control. I think the Wolves, kind of maybe emblematic of a young team and emblematic of some of their struggles offensively all season, like really tried to do it themselves a little bit too much with some of these headlong drives. And the Nuggets, that's really what they want. The Nuggets, you really, maybe more than any contender, like you have to beat them with the pass because you're going to be able to usually get 2 on the ball. You're going to get a reaction from them, particularly if you involve Jokic, and then you got to just pass the ball faster than they're able to rotate. And they are very good at rotating. They've cleaned up a lot of their issues there over the first 2 games. And so just even off a switch, Towns like going into traffic, it just really didn't work out particularly well. Rudy Gobert, I thought, really struggled offensively too. He had 5 turnovers. A couple of those were of the screening variety, but it was kind of a return to the bad old days for him where he would get some offensive rebounds, he'd miss some free throws, and he'd get the ball down low, or he was just kind of taking up space down there. They would miss him on some of these rolls to the basket as well. So Denver certainly improved their intensity quite a bit, but some of these other guys weren't great. I also want to shout out Jokic, still not a great rim protector, although he was better there, and the Wolves went 16 to 26 at the rim. They were on 50% all day and until the very end. And that was, I don't know if that was Jokic. I think that a lot of that was kind of guys missing layups that they probably should have made. And then there were a further 8 to 21 upper paint. But I thought on the perimeter, Jokic was really good. And they ran a bunch of stuff where they tried to like string him out or like stuff where they would try to get 2 on the ball and then have his man pop out for a flare screen. He diagnosed all that stuff. If he did get out on the floor, he was sprinting back into the play pretty quickly, making multiple efforts on the perimeter. I was impressed by his defensive effort level and intelligence today as well.
100%. And I want to go back to Towns and some of the statistical stuff with him is fascinating and potentially troubling for the Wolves, where not only 5 of 18 from the field, but 4 of 14 inside the arc and 3 of 11 inside the paint. And some of that is the way these things are logged. So Towns only listed with 1 turnover. They made and you could do this. Some of the plays were logged as a missed shot, like you could see it as a block shot or different things, rather than as a steal. And they were right in that borderline. You could kind of mark that either way. It is the possession going from the Wolves to the Nuggets if it's a rebound or however you want to do it. But Towns, he was trying to be aggressive, trying to do that. And also, like, you saw some of the limitations at times as a passer, where there were reads that were available to him that he was not taking, and you brought up Gobert, which is important to do as well. So Minnesota, that the non-Towns offense was an extremely important part of this. And while we're on the tactical front, the other big thing that we should discuss is something that Denver used really aggressively to their advantage. I was thinking it was the third quarter, but there were a couple different points in it where one of the things that Minnesota really doesn't want to do defensively is get Mike Conley on Jamal Murray. And Michael Malone and the coaching staff have done a really good job using that to their advantage by, and the best way they did this in game 4 was involving Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in the action to basically put more stress on the Minnesota defense, even if it's not like a play for KCP or anything like that. It's just understanding this is the thing they don't want. So what can we get Minnesota to sacrifice in order to take this off the table?
Yeah, and what they were doing a lot of times is making him the second screener. And so the way Minnesota was dealing with that was Conley was going to step out, hedge, stop Jamal Murray's progress coming off the screen, and knowing that KCP would slip out of there. And they're like, all right, well, Jamal Murray, if you want to kind of throw it at KCP's back and he can catch it, but he's not really moving towards the rim, we're okay with that. But what they came up with is, as soon as that was made, Murray would throw the ball to Jokic, and then Jokic would have the perfect passing able to find KCP cutting the rim. They got some good stuff out of that. Again, just kind of another example of how these guys are just like slowly beginning to diagnose him a little bit. The backcourt pressure really only was a factor once or twice. And I think the biggest thing with that was just that Murray was feeling better and in better shape or whatever it is, and just was like not as bothered by that. But they always made sure they had a screen in the backcourt. They tried to put more pressure like on Aaron Gordon when he would bring the ball up, but that was Gobert. He only can do so much there. He picked up a ticky-tack foul at the start of the game on that. Let's see, what else can we hit on that was
I have a couple things. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
So to me, there were 3 definitive stretches in the first half for the Nuggets from this contest, and some of them have a common thread. So the first one started, and this has happened in the playoffs. I was thinking about the Luka absence in game 2 was another one of these where Jamal Murray gets a second foul with 5:38 left in the first quarter. They're like, oh, this is a little bit of trouble, even though Murray had looked better physically in the beginning. And then Denver brings in Reggie Jackson. They pull Jamal Murray shortly thereafter with the foul trouble. And Denver goes on a 12-0 run. Jackson has 6 of those 12 points. He hits a couple big shots. Those are the only points he scores in the entire game. But that 12-0 run, it seems like things are going badly for Denver, and then they get back into it. And they have a first quarter lead when they had been trailing in the early going. And then like, okay, let's see where this goes after this. It's the non-Jokic minutes. Jamal Murray's going to check back in. This is another danger point for the Denver Nuggets. And in no small part because of the horrendous lineup that Minnesota put out there, the biggest mistake by Chris Finch in this game. Denver then, so right after that 12-0 run, they basically, it overall becomes that 28-4 run. So that's, I had it logged as 12-2, but you could extend it. You could move it in different ways to get it out. And
I mean, their offense was really the problem there. They scored 4 points in like 7 or 8 minutes or something.
Absolutely. And so Denver in the non-Jokic minutes, they were dominant during that stretch. Jokic in this game +3 in the game his team won by 8, but it's what Chris Finch did in that beginning of the second quarter, which was so preposterous to us at the time, and continues to be, obviously, is that Jokic is off the floor, so then you have a reduced pressure to have Rudy Gobert out there. That part makes some sense if you want to pair those guys. Even if Gobert, he did guard Jokic more individually in this game, but it's just more the idea of like you need your best defender out there when the other team has their best offensive player. I understand the thing of that. That stretch, the part of that stretch was the only time that Anthony Edwards was off the floor and Karl Anthony Towns was off the floor. So you're playing without your 3 best players at the same time. Your key defensive identity, your offensive identity, and your second best offensive player. And so it's not a surprise at the beginning of the second quarter that you're going to get your asses kicked because you're missing all those guys.
Yeah, I will give the Nuggets a lot of credit for the way that they played during that period. And what they actually did was Aaron Gordon was like the initiator, and the Wolves were surprisingly small at that point, right? Like they had Anderson and they had Naz Reid out there, and so Aaron Gordon was just like dribbling into post ups and attacking the basket. I think he was responsible for their first 6 points of that quarter. And Murray really didn't do all that much. Then they got some fast breaks as well, which was a big problem. And it was, but it really was more about the offense just not really having like a ton of theory to it. And yeah, I mean, as you meant, like for each of those guys to be out individually, it makes sense. But then to put a lineup out there without those guys, I think they hoped like Conley and Reed would be enough. And as it turned out, they were not. I mean, it's just not a very good offensive and defensive lineup in the end. And, the game, there was much interesting stuff to come, but the Wolves really never threatened after that point.
Well, and the closest before the very end that they got to threatening that was at the very end of the second quarter. And then you had one of the more ridiculous sequences that I can recall seeing in a playoff game, which is funny because we've had other ones in playoff games already this postseason where.
Yeah, I'm going to I think I'll put our call of that sequence on the front of the show, come to think of it.
And so Anthony Edwards makes a three with 48 seconds to go. Then Gobert commits a personal with 33. And so that partially resets the shot clock. And it ends up being that Jokic late clock feeds it to KCP for a three. And I talked about on the live show, I'm guessing it'll be in the call, about how they didn't get the 2-for-1. Well, that's true. They didn't quite get the 2-for-1. Instead, they got something even more ridiculous than that. Because, well, I don't want to say Minnesota went early because they didn't really go early. I talk about this all the time. The team should go before the end of the first, second, and third
Well,
quarters.
in particular, I mean, I think we were sort of like in the process of debating it, and then he goes with maybe like 9, but because they were putting 2 on the ball and they were going to run a pick and roll, like you kind of need time to like play out of that.
Yes.
And one thing they had some success with was actually setting their screens all the way near half court. And so they tried to do that, but then Ant tried to split it and turned it over, and they gave up a layup in transition, and then one of the most ridiculous half-court shots I've ever seen in my life. And it was great that it happened right in front of the TNT table by Murray, because like you could see like Jamal Crawford and Reggie Miller have both hit some pretty fucking crazy shots in their lives, and they were both just like, like it was amazing.
Yeah, and so they throw, Minnesota throws the pass to half court, and part of the reason we this came up a couple days ago is you throw that pass because it's almost
exception
impossible.
That proves the rule.
It's almost impossible for the defensive team to score a basket, to steal the ball, corral it, and shoot it in about 1 to 2 seconds. Because Chet Holmgren had the success on that in the OKC Dallas game. Au contraire, Jamal Murray is able to do that. Hits a preposterous half court shot. And so what was, and like sometimes I forget this, it was a 56-49, still a Denver lead, but a 56-49 lead with 21 seconds to go in the half, and then it goes to 64-49. And then at that point, it's like, oh, it's going to take a lot for Minnesota to come back to get back into this one.
A few other things to hit on in addition to Gordon and how good he was. Porter Jr. only took 4 shots and
didn't close.
You don't want, you don't want. He still played 35 minutes. Obviously, you don't want him shooting if you're Minnesota. Like I think that's probably a good thing that he takes that few shots. Like they forced Denver, I would say, largely to make some pretty tough ones. Like it wasn't just that they're getting wide open. Like in the first half, Jokic was like 6 of 7 in the upper paint at one point, and basically all those except for one were just individual post-ups, and he's doing those usually against another center with Gobert, another center kind of waiting under the rim, and yet he can still just get to this like really difficult contested shot and make it. And I mean, a couple of ones that Murray made in addition to the half court, like the other one he made in the first half where he did a step back, but he jumped with like his right foot pointed towards the sideline. Like his right foot was basically pointed towards the scorer's table, and he just jumped and turned in the air off a step back and drained it. I mean, this guy is one of like the most ridiculous shot makers in the league, and he proved that even when he was being guarded by the likes of McDaniels and Alexander Walker. For the Wolves standpoint, like I do think it was a little bit more of an offensive loss. Ultimately, the Nuggets shot making was just too good, but they did control the defensive glass. Yeah, I thought they made a few mistakes defensively in terms like they came out in this weird thing at the start of the second half where they just scrambled all of their matchups, like seemingly by like hitting a random number generator.
Yeah.
And so that led to Gobert just being on KCP to start the possession for some reason. And they just run their normal pick and roll. And Gobert was just like not used to being on him. And he tried to get to the basket, but Murray just went right in. I think it was Murray just went right in for a layup off like a little step up from Jokic. And
then there was the weird one at the end of the game where after I think it was a missed free throw, but there wasn't a push or anything like that. Anthony Edwards ends up on Jokic. Like at this point, I think the game was like 5 or 7 points. Like it was close enough where it was an unlikely Minnesota win, but it was a possible, like an unlikely comeback, but a possible one. And then Jokic just like beats him for a basket. Just like, how in the world did that happen?
There was another one where they were in zone, but Towns and Rudy didn't know who was supposed to be playing center in the zone. They gave up a bucket off of that. There's one where Rudy sets an illegal screen. I think they were complaining, and they just throw it ahead to Christian Braun for a layup. And like that's the one where Mike Conley kind of like tweaked his shoulder.
Yeah.
So yeah, they had some screws, but largely, I mean, I don't think that like their defense was bad in this game by any means. And then offensively, really nobody else had a good game. Conley, I thought, missed some shots that he would normally make in the first half, particularly from 2-point range. And Towns, I thought, was just like too overly aggressive at times on some threes. He was only 1 of 4 from 3. Like the Nuggets are completely taking his pick and pop game out by just switching that stuff. And so, I might want to see more, even if Ant is, if Towns is being guarded by KCP, I still would like to see more Ant Towns actions. Maybe even more Towns screening for Gobert to go set the screen. So Jokic is going to be late, or then they have to switch that, and then Jokic is on Towns. Is some more generally like triple screening actions to cause a few more problems. Like it's really hard to put 2 on the ball out of those type of actions, the way that the Nuggets were doing with some effectiveness. But I thought Alexander Walker was really rushing his threes in this one. He was -20, 0 of 4 from downtown. McDaniels, I thought, had one that he rushed as well. It wasn't as bad as game 3 when Seth had noted this, that they took, I think it was like 5 during the competitive portion of the game, 5 threes that were characterized as wide open. And then they took a bunch of ones that were contested, but like in the first 14 seconds of the shot clock, plays that really kind of like settles. Alexander Walker, I think in particular, had one like from the left corner when they still had 10 on the shot clock. That was just not the shot that they needed at that time.
But then on the converse, like we've mentioned it in passing, but Aaron Gordon being 4 of 4 on jump shots, being 5 of 6 on shots outside the restricted area as a part of his 11 for 12. He was huge at moments hitting those shots. And at a point, you're just like, with Minnesota, it's just like, those are the shots that you generate within it. Like the 6 of 6 in the restricted area, those are the ones you're really hoping to take away, other than in transition when you can't. And he had that one really good finish as well. And so at a certain point, you kind of the 0 for 4 from Nikhil, even though I agree with you that some of those were worse than they should have been, and the 4 for 4 on jumpers from Aaron Gordon, like those things are going to shake themselves out. But Gordon, he needed to step up. They didn't need him to step up, but it helped, and it made it so Denver was even harder to defend. Just so we have it out there, clean the glass. A 122 offensive rating for Denver and a 122 first shot half court offensive rating.
I was just looking at that. That is stunning. Absolutely stunning, because they didn't get any offensive rebounds in this game.
No, they basically had 0 offensive rebounds, 14%, which is super duper low. And then they were ineffective in transition. There were some bad transition turnovers. At times, it harkened back a little bit to Game 4 of the Lakers series, where they were throwing the ball a little bit too far ahead. There was one where Jokic was mad at Aaron Gordon, and I think there were 2 plays where Jokic out threw teammates. He had a wonderful passing game overall, including a gorgeous one where he kind of moved backwards to draw, I believe that was Towns, towards him to create the passing angle to get it to, I think that was Gordon for a finish.
Yeah, that was what I mean. You kind of were going back to that old feeling against the Nuggets when you're like trying to come back at the end of the game and they just run the clock down and then just like stab your heart out with 2 on the clock by getting a dunk or with a great pass or like an impossible jumper or a floater from Jokic or something like that.
I have
Yeah,
one other thing. I don't know if this counts as an adjustment because I don't know how hard I'm advocating for it, but we did see a stretch of this contest where the Wolves went supersized. They played Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, and Naz Reid together. And really, what that lineup was is it replaced Conley with Reid. Reid is a more aggressive 3-point shooter. He's a worse ball handler, but if you're putting the ball in Edwards' hands anyway, maybe you lose some of the second side stuff. But it was a notable wrinkle that they didn't really go back to. It was successful, but we didn't see that much of it.
Yeah, I think they might see that on film and consider deploying it, and particularly with the Anderson being -18 in 6 minutes. That could be a possibility, a way to get Naz Reid on the floor more. He is really quite the bellwether for them, it would seem like.
There was a stretch where Jamal Murray was impactful as the low man. He was getting into the action, forcing extra passes. Gobert had one, Towns had one. Like, that's all you're really asking for is to be in the mix to cause some problems.
Yeah, that was solid. He had a couple of nice strips there. The Wolves, part of why I picked them to lose the Phoenix series, obviously incorrectly, and ultimately why I picked them to lose this series in 7, was that their regular season offense just wasn't that good. And we've seen some more of that. Like, they were the number 1 offense in the playoffs, I believe, through 6 games. And now that has reverted a little bit. And this was even with Edwards having this spectacular game. Like, he'll be hard pressed to repeat this kind of shot making. Now, Denver also is, as superhuman as they may seem at times, you would not want to predict that they're going to repeat the incredible shooting performances that they've had in these 2 games for the rest of the series. And that'll, of course, be a huge thing to be concerned about. But the Wolves, like, they got to find a way to get Karl Anthony Towns going that's not him trying to create one-on-one, because that just was really not working. Another thing that was really big was like Christian Braun being able to play for 25 minutes and Justin Holiday like develop it.
Yeah.
Like, again, he's 3 of 5 from 3 again. He's hit some like movement threes as well, and he holds up like well enough on defense. I mean, Reggie Jackson again was totally minimized. He basically is out there only when Murray isn't playing at this point, although he did manage a +8. But Braun, they are going pretty darn small in a lot of these lineups, right? So they've got Watson's not playing at all. With Jokic off the floor, they're going with Brown and Michael Porter Jr. basically as the 4. So, and then they're also going with Brown, kind of, I guess, at the 4, like when the Heat closed, that was the case. And I think the Wolves just didn't like the way it looked with Rudy Gobert guarding Christian Braun in game 3. And so that was a lot of the reason why, like, when Gordon would be off the floor and Jokic was on, they didn't really feel comfortable putting Gobert on Brown anymore. And he did hit 1 3 that was above the break that was wide open. No one really closed him down on that. But that then left Gobert guarding Jokic, and Jokic seems quite comfortable in that matchup.
And that's a part of why Peyton Watson isn't really playing in this series, is that there isn't that it gives Minnesota some places to be defensively, and that Watson's a very talented defender, but I think Denver's calculus is that what Watson takes away from Minnesota's offense is not worth what he takes away from their own offense.
Yeah. Overall, just the Wolves, there were guys open that they just couldn't quite find. The windows are small, but Rudy Gobert is there rolling the rim. Now, you give it to him, maybe he's going to flub it, but there were circumstances where he rolled hard. They didn't find him. Ant did a nice job, I thought, of throwing the pass all the way over Gobert's head to the opposite corner. At times, I think they want to look for that a little bit more because that backside corner is kind of sneaking in a little bit to try to take Gobert's role if needed, or at least tag him so you can't throw the pass directly. So I do think throwing kind of taking that pass that's really actually 3 passes away to the corner is something they should look for more. Any other kind of adjustments or thoughts?
One other thing I wanted to mention, in the absences that weren't catastrophic, Jokic picked up his third and fourth fouls in quick succession. He gets pulled midway through the third. So basically they swapped his rest at the end, and instead of being the beginning of the fourth, it was the middle, it was the end of the third.
And I think they lost those minutes, didn't they?
No, eventually,
or if anything, it was like they won by 2 or something.
It was basically even for most of it. Minnesota picked up a couple at the very, very end, but not enough. Like the idea that you didn't make the hay while the sun was shining, and so that was another one of those. Like maybe there was an opportunity, and then I wanted to mention that there were a bunch of ridiculous Jokic plays in this game, and including some passes. But one of them was he has this possession. It's in the fourth quarter. The game's mostly settled, but it was Jokic basically went 1-on-2 on Rudy Gobert, the newly minted Defensive Player of the Year. He got his trophy right before this game. And Karl-Anthony Towns, center sized, even if he doesn't play center defense. And Jokic goes up, kind of works his way to a shot, misses it, gets a rebound, and gets fouled right between those guys. It's just incredible what he could do.
All right, let's hit some of these comments here. Saw a lot of MPJ guarding Cat when Gordon was on it. Yeah, that was the matchup a fair amount as well. I think maybe the KCP sticks out more in my mind because that's he was the one who got some of these strips sometimes. But if that is really the matchup, then they absolutely should be doing way more Ant and Towns pick and roll. And I think just in general, they should be trying to call up MPJ more than they have with Ant. The thing that I asked for, I think Minnesota saw this on film as well, is that the Conley Gobert stuff was really good. I thought Denver did a pretty decent job on that. And they really were not able to hit Gobert on the roll. And they're trying to set it, almost way on the left side of the floor. I might even try to go high on that a little bit more, because they were sort of like, oh, we'll get Jokic all the way over here and then we'll swing it to the upside. That kind of makes sense. But I think putting it out maybe in the middle of the floor and kind of running it to run it, as opposed to running it to, sort of like set up some other stuff. Like the other stuff will be set up if you make that play as good as it can be. Because again, I think Denver was pretty set in on that. Got a lot of comments about, game 2 rules. Minnesota has a big edge there. Like it got called tighter. How much of a factor do you make that in the end?
I don't think it got called that much tighter. There were some weird sequences in this game where there were no fouls at all. There was the one where we thought Gobert was going to get called for a technical and everyone's running over everyone. So I don't think it was as extreme as that. And it wasn't some of the games we've seen where every touch foul was called and all that. So calling less on grabbing on the perimeter helps Minnesota. I don't think that's the solve. That's the way that this all works.
I mean, I would say that in this game, there were maybe 3 kind of cheap ones. Like the one that Towns gets at half court on Gordon. And you could make the argument that takes the steam out of some of Minnesota's pressure. I'm just not sure how effective that stuff ultimately is now that they're used to it and they kind of have some counters that are working. I mean, there's a reason that not everyone plays like that all the time. And Denver, I think, is smart enough to get some counters and some backdoors out of that. And I mean, it's really, to me, more than that it's been refereed differently. It's just that Denver is like getting a lot more physical themselves. Like they're meeting the Wolves' physicality. So I'm not sure that there's like that much of a difference. I mean, unless you want to argue like, well, in game 2, they're specifically calling a bunch of illegal screens, but they weren't calling contact when they're trying to pressure up. I don't think that's that much of a factor in this crazy turn that we've seen.
And then we got a couple questions about like Minnesota tightening up the rotation. I mean, it's pretty tight. They played at Anderson 6 minutes, Naz Reid 19. He's going to be part of the rotation no matter what. Nickeil Alexander-Walker 24. And they didn't really have anybody who dealt with severe trial trouble. Rudy Gobert was out briefly with it. And so for me, the bigger problem is not like excising players. I mean, Anderson is limited, but you kind of have, I mean, it's hard to run a 7-player rotation. It's making sure that when those players are out, it's in cogent ways. And so, I mean, Anthony Edwards played 45-20, I think was the total there. And so it's like, I don't think they could really tighten it. You just have to make sure that there is a viable offensive and defensive approach on the floor at every moment in time. Because if you don't have that, Denver may crush you.
Ben asks the best way to handle how Gordon has been playing the last couple of games, and he's done most of his damage, I would say, in when Gobert hasn't been guarding him. I still think that that's probably the best strategy that you're going to come up with. I wanted them to maybe think about doubling Jokic more with both Towns and put Towns on him and then have Gobert come double. They only really did it one time when Gobert was on him and Towns came to double, and Jokic picked that apart, I think, for a dunk. Gobert, I think, is just a little bit better about when to double. Hopefully they can turn Jokic towards the baseline and bring Gobert over. And like there's one play where Jokic kind of had to airmail his pass to the weak side because they were just pressuring him so much and he had to get it over the hands. So maybe that's a way to start trying to make him uncomfortable a little bit more, because he was just, especially what he did in the first half, was just killing Towns. And as with respect to Gordon, I think it's more about dealing with him when Jokic isn't playing. And yeah, it's really tough. Like he caused a bunch of problems, like for the Lakers and the Heat last year with his size and physicality. You have all this other shit that you need to deal with. I mean, that's the nature of playing the Nuggets, right? It's putting your finger in the dike. Like, oh, as soon as you think, all right, well, here's what our strategy is going to be on Murray and Jokic. Well, now Gordon's going to get going because you had to put some smaller guy on him that he could take advantage of physically. Yeah, but I think just generally having more size out there, like I think Anderson was something that he went through a couple of times. So I think just trying to generally be bigger, like, is the way to try to deal with him, and also you just can't overreact to him making shots too much, particularly above the break. I think you need to just continue to allow that to some degree. But it still is more to me about the Minnesota offense, and like Denver's been killing it, and they should be better defensively. They should force some more turnovers, but they're also if they're going to shoot this way, you're just going to lose. And so trying to react to that, it seems like then you're just going to open up all this other stuff and shit'll be easy for them. Like, they're making it hard for them. They're just still scoring anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And there may not be a way. In the big picture, is Karl-Anthony Towns increasing his trade value?
He's
a little.
I mean, I think
he looks healthy at least, right? Like if he came back and was just still injured, that would be a problem.
Well, and I think broadly speaking, Towns has functioned reasonably well within the team defensively. Now, this was a bad offensive game for him, and there have been a couple of those, but there have been a couple of really good ones as well. So you have to kind of, as a potential shooter, you have to sell yourself on the parts that Towns can help you with. And the idea that we know that he's not going to be like the lead defensive player, even if that's what it looked like going back to the Hoop Summit and as a draft prospect. So I don't think he's hurt it, and that's actually probably a positive in that sense. But I don't think there are a couple games that have been really good. But, I'd say, as you said, looking healthy is the most important thing.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of about the same as it was in the. I mean, I think the fact that he's lost a little bit of weight is nice, but when you trade him, it's like, well, all right, you're like, it's like, should we just try making him a center again, like, and just seeing if we can like really juice our offense that way and deal with it for a team that's, like the Chicago Bulls or something. Like, yeah, that probably would actually be a way to be a lot better than what they've been, right? But playing him at the 4. Then, I mean, we've seen how his offensive impact has kind of been muted there. Let's see. Adjustments offensively for the Wolves' game. Yeah, I think we talked about it already. I mean, more Conley Gobert in the middle of the floor, more calling up MPJ, who, when he's been attacked generally in these playoffs, like, I think it's gone pretty well. I thought the Lakers, like, he couldn't guard LeBron at all, for example. I thought the Lakers went after him a reasonable amount. And certainly I don't think he can guard Ant. I don't think he has the level of lateral movement. And especially if he's going to be on Towns, I mean, you got to run that Ant Towns pick and roll. So those are some of the things that I would come up with. And yeah, the Rudy stuff, he kind of is what he is. I think they should try to look for him on the roll a little bit more. But I can't guarantee you that he's going to make the play off of that, even if he has gotten a little bit better. All right, that was a good little discussion there. Let's get to, I don't know that we have to spend much time on it because the analysis seems rather facile here. With Pacers 121, Knicks 89. Knicks had their first truly atrocious shooting game, I believe, of the playoffs. Maybe they had one in the Philly series, I can't remember, but 7 of 37, and they made 4 in the garbage time fourth quarter, only 2 in the first half. Pacers started to shoot it better towards the end of the first half, and then in the third when they continued to pour it on. I wouldn't say that the shooting from 3 had a ton to do with this result, though. It's just the Knicks looked completely beaten down.
They were thoroughly out of gas, and the Pacers pushed them on both ends of the floor. And I've been incredibly critical of the Pacers throughout this playoffs. I thought that they had a disappointing win of a series against the Bucks, who were exceedingly shorthanded for a lot of that series. No Giannis at all, limited Lillard even when he was on the floor. And this, I'm not going to say like this is what I was expecting or this is what I was hoping. This was far better than that. But the idea that the Pacers could really challenge their opponents, could make them work, could wear them out. And the timing of it was extremely fortuitous for Indiana. The Knicks, they've been pushing their guys really hard. They had an incredibly hard fought series against the Sixers. And that combined with, so the like overall fatigue, looking like the Knicks were out of gas, combined with playing 2 straight up non-shooters, Achua and Hartenstein in the starting 5, and then Josh Hart, who is an inconsistent shooter, that plus Jalen Brunson not looking like the Jalen Brunson, that was enough to completely sabotage / destroy, whatever word you want to use, the Knicks offense, which had they had a 93.5 offensive rating overall in the 31 minutes that Jalen Brunson was on the floor.
Yeah, and during the competitive portion of the game, which I'll charitably say was the first 18 minutes or so, they had a 60 half-court offensive rating. And one adjustment that was made is they did go with Nembhard more on DiVincenzo rather than Haliburton. They decided to kind of live with Haliburton on Hart, which they hadn't really wanted to do because I think they felt like they were going to be just too soft on the boards, where Nembhard's kind of more physical against Hart with boxing out. And I think they also wanted Nembhard to be more of a help defender. I thought actually Haliburton was pretty good as a help defender in this game, and Nembhard was better against DiVincenzo. There were moments where the Knicks in the first quarter had some chances, like make some open threes, and it might have been a little bit different, at least early on. Obviously, this was such an avalanche, you can't point to that. But I thought the Pacers actually were making some defensive mistakes the first 6, 7, 8 minutes of the game, and then the Knicks just weren't able to take advantage of those, and then it became a total disaster. Well, some Knicks missed layups. I thought Turner actually was really good in this one. I've been extremely critical of him in these playoffs. Defensively, he had 3 blocks. I thought he was excellent. He didn't miss a shot either. He's 5 of 5 from the field, and the Pacers weren't really going crazy from 3 until kind of the second half of the second quarter. But it ultimately just goes back to Brunson. And if he is going to look like this, just not able to get separation, I think the thing that even shows more than that is just every movement that he makes, every effort that he makes seems to be, and they also had a quick turnaround here playing Friday night and then a day game on Sunday. Just seems like it takes so much, maybe even more mental than physical energy from him to where, okay, if he gets the ball, he can decide, all right, I really got to go now. I have to like steel myself and do this. And, maybe he can run the pick and roll, or he can kind of get to the spot. And, if he's against Nemhard still, he can, you'll still be able to score on him. And maybe against Neesmith he can, but maybe not. But he's not like, you're not seeing any of the plays where he's really wrong-footing the guys with a move off the ball or a quick rejection of the screen where he's getting the defense totally out of position. Like, he could still be semi-effective, just sort of getting to a spot and working around and using his body to get a shot off. But the quickness seems to be completely dissipated at this point. And hopefully a little more of a break before a night game on Tuesday, and then a 2-day break after that, it can get him closer, at least to what we saw in the second half of game 2.
Hopefully, because otherwise this is going to be a less fun series to watch, and potentially even not that well. It's just going to be 2 games minimum, no matter what.
Yeah. And it should be 3-1 right now too. Let's I thought if they just put Neesmith on Brunson in the second half of game 2, or even down the stretch of game 2, this is a 3-1 series in my opinion.
And the Knicks certainly could have won game 3, but I thought the Pacers were superior there. And we'll have to see if anything. Hopefully Isaiah Hartenstein's shoulder is fine. He had a tough fall during, I believe that was the second quarter of this one. So we'll keep an eye on that. And
he said after the game he has a pinched nerve, but he thinks he'll be fine. Brunson was like, I'm good, even though he's obviously not.
And the Indiana Pacers won this game going away despite their starting 5 not taking a single free throw. They didn't need to. They were plenty fine offensively in this one. Overall, 14-31 from 3. The Knicks did beat up on them at times on the offensive glass, but it wasn't enough to make
not
up
during
the
competitive portion, I would say.
Yeah, not enough. I know, they got some, but it wasn't enough to turn the tide. And one of the reasons why is that the Knicks were 14 of 28 in the paint during that first half. And I don't even know what we're counting this. The competitive portion of this game was thoroughly dominant early. And so one of my single favorite play from the competitive portion of this game was I talked about the Pacers working harder on defense and trying to make the Knicks work harder. Was Jericho Sims comes in and the Pacers are putting a little bit of pressure, and then the ball ends up in Sims' hands in the backcourt, and the Pacers force an 8-second violation because when your center is dribbling the ball up, put pressure on him. And it reminded me a little bit of that double dribble that wasn't in the previous game with Hartenstein. But it's if you have this guy who's not comfortable in that circumstance, put a little bit of heat on him. And it's also unlikely that a center in that spot is going to do the rapid fire give and go, would beat you all the way down the court. That's just not something that they're wired to do in a way that certain guards can pull off, or Jamal Murray with the pressure or anything like that. And so it was just, showed to me that the Pacers were playing with more intention and more intensity.
And Brunson too, the reason that happens is because they don't want to give him the ball and put the miles on him to bring the ball up against CJ McConnell. So they give it to someone else who's less qualified. And since you brought up Sims, absolute deer in the headlights for him. And I didn't watch his second half minutes, I'll be quite honest there, but I thought it was a mistake by Tom Thibodeau to not make Precious Achiuwa the backup center. And Sims was just totally lost. It was quite cruel, and I think great strategy by Indiana. They're so good with the Spain pick and roll, and I've lamented that since they lost Buddy Hield, they can't run that anymore. But what they've started doing now that Haliburton has been on fire from 3, and he was a further 4-10 in just 28 minutes today, is make him the Spain screener at the free throw line. And so there was one play where Sims just had no idea where he's going. He ends up switching on to Haliburton and running towards him at the 3-point line. I can assure you, whatever they were supposed to be doing, it didn't involve Jericho Sims sprinting to the 3-point line out of that play. And I think they gave up a layup to McConnell on that play. So they should certainly go back to that, I think, as well. And Nemhard had some nice little attacks in semi-transition. I mean, that's where they truly killed him in the first half. I mean, it was during that period when the Knicks had a 60 offensive rating in the half court. Pacers only had a 90, which is totally survivable, but they just destroyed them running, and particularly because the Knicks missed a lot of shots in the paint and just were not able to bring the requisite level of energy. Part of that is now they have to play Alec Burks. He's not really an energy guy. Sims doesn't really know what he's doing. McBride has been a total non-factor in this series as well. Let's see if I had anything else. The Pacers did more of Toppin and Siakam together. Then they went with Isaiah Jackson, but not until the second quarter. Let's see. Yeah, that's Brunson did appear maybe to tweak that left foot early when Nesmith kind of moved forward as Brunson jumped forward on a three. The announcers were going crazy that should have been a landing zone foul. It was relatively benign, but I don't know what the state of Brunson's foot is. I actually thought there were a few plays where the Knicks and Brunson in particular could have flopped more. That was one of them. Miles Turner was setting some massive illegal screens in this game. The guards were going early. Turner was still, I mean, it was basically, I would say, like twice as bad as the one that actually got called an illegal screen at the end of game one. And so I think actually the Knicks should have been flopping on that. Hey, maybe they could send a tape to the league office. You're allowed to do that, right?
Yeah, small market bias, man.
But yeah, it all comes back to Brunson, obviously. And, Hartenstein wasn't able to be effective either. They kind of just didn't play him that many minutes after he hurt the shoulder. That wasn't great. So can they summon? It just seems like normally in this circumstance, the team up with home court is a big favorite. But I think the Knicks are just too injured. Anunoby hasn't even started running yet. He's been running in the pool, which is basically meaningless at this point as far as him getting out on the court anytime soon. We told you when he got hurt, he was done for the series for sure. That's seems to certainly be trending that way. I think that's all I got, though. It's just sad that so many of these series have become wars of attrition, and it's kind of sad to me that a few of these playoffs have really been like that. And while I certainly appreciate the physicality and the effort and pushing through fatigue, and like that's part of summoning something that you didn't know you had, like all that is part of sports. But I do think maybe I'd kind of like to see that within the course of a game, maybe not just this like incredible marathon schedule, and maybe it's just Nate, bad luck that all these guys are hurt. But yeah,
I agree with you on that. However, if I had to choose where the injuries were going to occur, other than, I mean, it sucks that the Bucks weren't like this. Like, we've gotten the top of the West pretty healthy. The Celtics are probably
the bottom of the West was pretty fucked, but the top of the West.
And so, like, the Nuggets, Jamal Murray, like, hopefully he's making it out of this okay. The Wolves are healthier. Like, Towns is looking better, and Luka, we still don't know. And then the Thunder are pretty healthy. So, like, that part of it, and then Boston, they're surviving. And I mean, and then just briefly on that front, got reporting on Sunday that Donovan Mitchell is questionable with a calf strain for Monday's game. We don't know if he's going to play, but considering this is, I believe, the first time I've heard the phrase calf strain with Donovan Mitchell, that sounds really bad for the Cavs.
Yeah, he was going to be questionable, and also he was not as impactful in the second half as he was in the first. Perhaps that was part of the reason for that. Do you have any other news we got to hit before the lottery? Let me see.
I don't think so.
Wendell Carter is going to have hand surgery. He initially had a hand issue at the end of 2023. I can't recall whether he had surgery or not, but he apparently is going to need this procedure now. Hopefully shouldn't mess up his offseason, his left hand, but I think it is the hand that he injured back then. And yeah, all right, I think that's all we've gotten here. At least that's not too specific to like a team's off season, which we'll of course get to. So yeah, the lottery, the Atlanta Hawks, the number one. Let's just kind of go through an order of how it ended out and kind of talk about the implications for the teams. We of course have not scouted these players, don't have an opinion on who they will or should be taking at this point. We will, of course, get to that and discuss it more in the context of specific teams and the offseason outlooks once we have that in the books. But just in terms of the overall implications for the Atlanta Hawks here of getting the number one overall pick.
The Hawks are a fascinating lottery winner here because you can make credible arguments that moving up from number 10 to number 1 could push them in different directions they would have been considering already. So you can say, and I mean, this year's draft, we'll talk general consensus that the top of the draft is weaker than usual. So this is not like you're getting Victor Wembanyama, Zion Williamson, anything like that, Anthony Davis. So you could make an argument that this this is the impetus for a full youth movement. You trade Trae Young, you can tear it down further because this player can be a foundational piece. You could make that argument credibly. But you could also make the argument that whether whoever that ends up being, whether it's you like one of the centers or you like one of the wings or something else like that, that you can get a better player to put around their current existing core. And that could be, we're thinking as Trae Young as kind of the focal point of this. And so if it's a center that you think is better, can be maybe the two-way player or a forward that fits with Jalen Johnson and a Kongwu and whatever else. So I think that it definitely changes the geometry of the decision that Landry Fields and company make. But I don't know. I know it changes it, but I don't know that it definitively changes it one direction or another as of yet.
Yeah, I mean, the PR battle, you would think that now that they have the number 1 overall pick, even if that's not, reputed to be a superstar, it does just kind of buy you some time. Sure. And just make it easier. And I don't know what the trade value of that pick is. We've only seen the number 1 pick get traded twice ever, which was Chris Webber and Markelle Fultz were the only ones that ever happened for. And worth noting, actually, that the team that traded for number 1 certainly came out the worst for wear in both of those instances. Although Webber
as trading up often does.
Yeah. Now Webber ended up being probably, I guess, a better player than Penny Hardaway. But if Penny Hardaway had stayed healthy, that wouldn't have been the case. Penny Hardaway would have been better than
and Webber was not as successful for the Warriors, which is another important consideration.
Yes, well, they probably shouldn't have given him a contract that had an out after 1 year. And that was pre-rookie scale. That was the last year, actually, before, or 2 years before.
2 years, Glenn Robinson.
Yeah, Glenn Robinson was the last guy who was not subject to the rookie scale as the number 1 pick. Yeah, so, but maybe if they do want to kind of rebuild or trade away Trae Young, who's been the face of the franchise, this can give you some cover for that. And now, particularly if they could make a deal with the Spurs and get their picks back, that would, in theory, be ideal. I don't know how interested the Spurs are in Trae Young or whether all of those picks are something that would be given back. Maybe it could be DeJounte as well. But I think this gives them even more cover to just kind of take the best offer for whichever, a Trae or DeJounte. I would even consider moving both of them.
Sure.
And even if you don't get your picks back from the Spurs, you get a bunch of picks for them and just say, like, hey, we're rebuilding here. That's what we're doing. Now, it still would be ugly in the next couple of years if they give up a high pick. I don't think they'll go that direction, at least initially, in part because of that. So I'm not sure how much of a change this is going to be. There's no Wembanyama, of course, in this draft. Number 2, Wizards.
Wait. One more quick thing. Another consideration. We'll talk about this in their offseason preview. Jumping from number 10 to number 1, that actually has a significant difference also for Atlanta's tax bill because for their finances, because 5.5 million versus 12.6. That's a big difference for some of these things. So we'll have to note that it's a trade-off you will make even in a weak draft. You'll go from 10 to 1 any day of the week, but it is something that will change things.
Yeah, Al notes that Wiggins got traded for Kevin Love. I don't count that because it only happened after LeBron came back, and they even drafted him and then played him in Summer League for the Cavs before
the Cavs had drafted Wiggins with the intention to keep him. That is a different thing.
Yeah, I think so. And he ended up getting moved, and it was for an established player in Love, but it wasn't. When it happens at draft time, I think that's like kind of a pure trade, but I probably should have known that. You're right. So number 2 is the Wizards, and they'll get another pretty good player. Their rebuild is going to be going on long enough that it's not the end of the world if this is like, their only bite at the apple here is drafting number 2. And hey, congrats to them for retaining the pick. that they owe from the Russell Westbrook trade yet again. So not a ton of analysis there. They're a rebuilding team. They'll use the pick. Houston, though, this is from Brooklyn. Houston actually had 2 chances of being in the top 4. One of them was a 7% chance with their own pick that was top 4 protect they owed to OKC. That one stays at 12 and goes to OKC, which good for OKC. They had some pretty good luck with that 12th pick. They got Jalen Williams with that 2 years ago in a pick that they also acquired via trade. But yeah, that Brooklyn pick had a 20% chance of being in the top 4, given where Brooklyn ended up. But Houston, I mean, we already knew that they made the right decision back in 2021. And it's important to remember, too, like we just kind of forget these picks go out 7 years. Like it will be probably 11 years after those trades when you see who they get with the final pick that you really know what the final toll is for that. But this one, like they could have traded for like Ben Simmons and some other stuff. Maybe it could have been Tyrese Maxey, but who knows whether he would have been part of the deal for Harden. But Maxey wasn't considered to be that good at that time. And then they instead were like, no, we want the picks. They were adamant that they wanted the picks. They weren't really that interested in Ben Simmons. Even, the quote unquote all NBA version of Ben Simmons was going to get them to like 32 wins or something and just didn't make any sense. So I credit Tillman Fertitta, particularly after, kind of the way the Harden thing went down. I credit their front office, even after they had just lost Daryl Morey. You could be, maybe they're like, oh, we got to establish ourselves here. We got to try and win some games. And instead they're like, no, like we're going to just suck for a while. And now they're back 3 years later. If they had taken Simmons, they would just now be figuring out that Ben Simmons wasn't going to work. And then they would have a bunch more pain ahead. And now they have this guy who they're going to draft at number 3 who can be part of their group or potentially use in trade.
And they go a lot of directions that Houston can go with this. And even if this, ends up being that there aren't stars in this draft, ideally a starting caliber player, maybe even a high-end reserve, could fill a lot of different roles for them. And we're not going to scout specific players for that, but especially when you consider that the Rockets, eventually they're going to need to figure out a point guard or the present in the future. That could be a logical need. They could go in a lot of different directions, and it'll be, or you can instead try to move that for somebody who is more identifiable. Maybe they're currently on an NBA contract. So big winner, Houston Rockets, because even if they're not the greatest choices, they will have better choices than before. And sure, if they could choose, they would have had their pick be 3, and then they could have had 2 lottery picks. But I think it'll work out reasonably well for them anyway. And then the third of the teams to move up, they moved up to the least. So 3 of the 4 top 4 spots are held by teams that did not have the 4 worst records in the league. San Antonio moves up from the 5th worst record to the 4th pick in the lottery. That will be better for them, of course, than picking 5th. And they will have a number of options there. We don't know exactly who will and will not be on the board. But San Antonio, as you and I have basically quantified it before, is that they need help everywhere but center. So you could get somebody that can help you. And then the other big piece of news for San Antonio, which I guess, or do you want to go straight in order? Or do you want to just hit the Spurs in one shot?
Yeah. Let's hit them in one shot. So, I think, San Antonio obviously could be a possible trade-up guy. Like you could see, just because he's French and they need help with that position, Zachary Risacher being a target for them, the price to trade up in this draft may not be as high. Risacher is being mocked, a little bit ahead of where San Antonio is right now, but they've got the pick from San Antonio, or they've got the pick from Toronto at 8. And then, of course, they also have other future capital, or they could even maybe trade one of their players as well if they wanted to go get him. He would be a good fit for them. They could think about trying to go Isaiah Collier, who is not being mocked that high at this point, but he's, I think, the one point guard that, actually, I don't even know the guys well enough. So let's just end that line of discussion. I will be there in a month. Don't worry. Let's talk about that 8th pick, though, that will become San Antonio's, and Toronto got themselves Jakob Poeltl at $20 million a year out of that, though.
Congratulations. Yeah, that, and I mean, it's a part of a series of different moves for the Raptors, and have generally been very heavy with praise on Masai Ujiri and building that championship team. But they've given up a couple of pretty juicy picks in recent years for relatively weak returns. They gave up a first round pick in the Thaddeus Young trade, if memory serves. They gave up, and then there was one in this one, and for Jakob Poeltl, of course, and then there was one other one, right? Haven't they given up a couple recently?
Sorry, I was sending a tweet to promote the live stream. What was the question?
The first round picks that Toronto has given up, like post, was it like in 21? Anyway, they've given up a series of first round picks in recent vintage, and the Poeltl one is definitely suboptimal, and was top 6 protected. They end up being right on the fringe of that, and there is an argument to be made that Toronto benefits from this, not only clearing the obligation in a weak draft, but theoretically, like that they could have, it could have gone differently. We don't know how good or bad they are going to be next year, but it is embarrassing. And you gave up a lottery pick for a guy and to overpay a guy who isn't going to move the needle that much for you in our estimation. So unfortunate for them, but maybe fortunate to get out.
Well, and particularly because the fact that pick was out there probably like prevented them from tanking sooner and actually giving themselves a chance to keep it as well.
Absolutely.
Like top 6 was just like such a great number picked by San Antonio to just kind of like fuck Toronto's planning and resulted in being given up.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good point.
And then, Memphis is a big loser here too, right? Yeah, go ahead.
You have this whole stretch right before that we have to acknowledge as losers. So I brought up the 3 teams moved into the top 4. That means 3 teams with the 4 worst records do not pick in the top 4, and that in sequence is Detroit at 5, Charlotte at 6, Portland at 7, and Portland and Charlotte have had lottery luck recently, so it's not, you don't feel as badly for them.
So is Detroit. Detroit got the number 1 pick in 2021.
That's true.
I mean, so like they got the number 1 pick because it's not okay. You would think, right? Even if Detroit is the worst record 4 years in a row, which they're basically close to that, right? But I would say like they weren't guaranteed to get the number 1 pick. I would say even with having gotten 5 3 times and 1 in that draft, that they are, in terms of just like your overall expected outcome, the value getting 1 is so high that they probably actually have made out as well or better than they have a right to respect in the aggregate of that. Everyone is, poor Detroit. And yeah, they've gotten number 5. What is it now? 3 years in a row. They got Ivy, Asar Thompson, and now this one. Is this the 3rd year in a row they've had the worst record? I don't think it is, but they've fallen out.
They had the 3rd worst record in 21-22.
Yeah, okay. So that's like, for them actually getting 5 is not the end of the world that year either. Like that actually was like involved some luck for them because they didn't have the
worst
4.
record in 21 either. They had the 2nd worst record. The Rockets had that, and then they ended up falling to 2 and getting green.
Yeah. So everyone who's saying that like they've like in this rebuild that they've just like gotten fucked by the odds, like no, they've kind of really ended up about where you're supposed to be given where they've been, and maybe even slightly ahead because the league is just so superstar driven to have a chance of that. And Cade may still get to that point, honestly. So yeah, and certainly like you said, like people are like, oh yeah, they've gotten screwed. Well, but if they'd gotten 2 number 1 picks in over a 4-year period, people would be like, oh, they've gotten so lucky. Like if they got Wembanyama last year, people would be like, they got Wembanyama again. Like this is insane, right? So yeah, so Charlotte and Portland fall out of it as well. It is noteworthy though that San Antonio did really play to the end. I mean, you can talk about Carmelo believing in that shit, but like when it comes to just pure random number drawings like this, but San Antonio actually, won a bunch of games at the end, falls behind Charlotte and particularly Portland was pretty noteworthy. They had 22 wins. Charlotte and Portland had 21, but San Antonio's ball comes up and they move up to 4. Those teams move down. And yeah, Memphis, it is like for this to be like the gap year for them, like they're not really going to end up with anything that's going to change their franchise in all likelihood. And maybe there wasn't that player in the top 5 anyway, but this is just like, okay, is the 9th pick really that much better than like the 12th pick or something. And part of that's because they actually won way more games than you would expect because they are the Grizzlies and they play hard. Utah,
Got
damn good thing
close.
that they tanked their asses off, right?
Sure, I mean, you could make a really weird argument that if they had finished with the 10th worst record, that they would have been the team that jumped up to number 1 or something like that. But no, I mean, 2 teams, they had a top 10 protected pick. They fell twice, but they were able to hold it, so it will convey in another year. And we'll see what they can get at 10. I think the Jazz are going to look pretty similar next year to what they look like this year, but you'll have that. And then the rest of it, we already brought up. So Chicago, they're at 11. The Thunder
We
via
got asked
Houston.
in the chat quickly, by the way, that like had the Bulls winning at the end. Did that hurt them at all? And no, they actually were 3 clear of Atlanta, which was the next team. So that there's no way that, and those teams were competing with each other for home court in the play-in. So there's no way that it would have made sense. Like Chicago wasn't going to finish with a worse record than Atlanta.
I mean, the hilarity would have been if Brooklyn would have been more viable. Brooklyn would have been more viable in the year. They're competing for that. They get that spot and then win the lottery. / then Houston winning the lottery. Yeah. But that obviously is not what happened. And so then we could finish it out. Chicago 11, Oklahoma City via Houston 12, which we already discussed, Sacramento 13, and then the Warriors will convey their lightly protected pick to the Portland Trailblazers.
Yeah, that had been top 4 protected. That's from the Andre Iguodala salary dump in the summer of 2019 that enabled them to bring in D'Angelo Russell in a sign and trade. It got them under the apron.
Yeah. And then just to walk people through it, that one then went to Boston in the Porzingis Marcus Smart trade, and then went from Boston to Portland in the Drew Holiday trade.
Yeah, Grizz had it originally. So yeah, I mean, nothing that's like, I mean, particularly just because there isn't that guy in this draft, as far as I'm told. Yeah, maybe I'll watch the film and like someone, but probably not. So, but nothing that I would consider like earth shaking. I mean, Atlanta, if this changes the direction of the Atlanta franchise, and Houston getting another asset as well, I think is, and the question of whether they're going to try to trade the pick. I'm sure both Atlanta and Houston will explore avenues for trading, but the nature of things is that you usually don't find the trade that you want. And like, because if you want to trade it, then the guy that's there probably isn't that good. And so you feel like you end up not getting enough value for the quote unquote number 3 pick. And so you just take the guy, is usually what ends up happening. All right, that will do it. Thanks so much for joining us on YouTube, but we got to pick a couple of commenters that we would, maybe we could take another couple of questions too. We got some all caps questions about the Knicks here. So, we can hit a couple of those.
Well, I'll pick my winner now while we're doing it. Was great. The Karl Anthony Towns trade value one I thought was an interesting question because I haven't thought about it in that context at all. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, and hey, if they lose these next 2 games and just lose this series 4-2, like what is the takeaway of, is this team worth paying? Like, do they try to make moves in the offseason? Are they just like internal growth with this group or we need to supplement in some fashion? That'll be
so that was Tats Bullion. So Tats Bullion, you can dunckedonprime@gmail.com, correct?
Indeed. Yeah. Send us a message and we will hook you up with a free year of Dunc'd On Prime. If you're already a subscriber, that will kick in after your present year. And then just a lot of questions from Latrell Sprewell is the American Dream. I hate to reward the all caps, but if he felt that severely about it, I guess we got to answer it. Just like what adjustments the Knicks can make. And the level of panic inherent in the question, I probably would share it at this point as a Knicks fan. And I'm just not really like, there aren't any buttons left personnel wise for Tom Thibodeau to push. They're pretty worn out in terms of the minutes. I mean, I think that for game 5, they're going to go crazy. I mean, I think you got to go all out to win game 5. You can kind of take your foot off the throttle a little bit in game 6 and hope to win game 7 at home with this group. playing Hartenstein every single minute that he can handle it. But he's so important for their offense too. Like, there's a big offensive downgrade when you go Sims or Achua at center. Like, they need him to do some of that stuff. I think more screening action involving Halliburton. Maybe see if you can get him onto DiVincenzo. Let DiVincenzo do a little bit more of the ball handling and attacking. And I thought also when Halliburton was on Burks, that was something that they could go after. But we didn't talk about it at all. Halliburton was coming in, was questionable with like 3 separate ailments, and he looked completely fine. He was fantastic. So if he's going to keep playing the way he's played the last 3 games, like, that's going to be a big problem for New York. He's probably due for a little bit more of a stinker at this point. And yeah, Achua as the backup center would be the other one I would look at as well. No more Sims to the extent you can, but that's, let's take another guy out of the rotation. You're bringing then the 2 guys you bring off the bench are going to be guards, and like they're small now at the 4 too. Like, Hart is your 4. He's going to need to rest at least a little bit. It's
he got enough rest in this game for the next month, so he's fine.
Yeah, so I fear, like, if Brunson could get back to the level that he was at for the first, I guess it would be 8 games of the playoffs, then I think they got a shot. If not, then it's, I mean, I'm not saying they can't win another game in this series, but I would favor the Pacers at that point. So, all right, I need to pick mine. And let's see here. All right, let's go Tyson Brody here, because he asked me about food. I'm actually really hungry right now. So non-Lotus of Siam Vegas Rex. If you are willing to go off strip, which is obviously more important, I think everyone can tell you what the good strip stuff is. There's a few I would point to. One is Mian, which is in Chinatown, Mian. They have just an amazing Szechuan cold noodles that's spicy. Just any kind of Szechuan noodles is good. It's like a $12 a bowl noodle place. And then out kind of on the west side, Vegas is pretty small. It's only probably about 15-minute drive from the strip or an Uber ride, is a place called Other Mama, which is one of the best seafood places. They have some sushi, but they have a lot of more like creative Japanese inspired seafood dishes, great raw bar as well. So, and then there is, let me look up what the name of this place is. There's this 24-hour Japanese bakery that I went to the last time I was in Vegas. What is that called? Let me find it. Don't make me open up my Google Doc. Yes, Pullman Bread is what it's called. It's like kind of southwest of town. They had this thing there that they called it, I think they called it like Memories of COVID. It was this amazingly crunchy, doughy pocket that had curry and meat inside, and then it had like these little like things that looked like the spike protein on the COVID molecule all around it that were I don't know if it was fried, it might have been just like baked at really high temperature, so you could like pick off these little spike proteins and eat them by themselves. They were so crunchy. It was really good. So yeah, that's what we got. And Tyson, go ahead, email dunckedonprime@gmail.com. Thanks to all you who commented, and please like and subscribe and all of that on YouTube. And tomorrow live show, we will do, I think, some of OKC Dallas. I'm feeling a little tired on the live show, so might only do the second half of that one, but we'll let you know on that. We'll definitely at least do the second half. So we'll talk to y'all then.